I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you, as a guitar player, should not buy a vintage guitar. I see a lot of young players that are chasing after these vintage guitars because they somehow believe that a vintage guitar has some kind of magic in it, has some kind of magical sound, has something special in it that, no other guitar can have. It's just not true. It's just not true. So I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you should not buy a vintage guitar as a guitar player. Number 5 is the price. This could also be number 1, but I have it as number 5. The price. It's outrageous. The prices are outrageous. A 1969 Fender Telecaster, $25,900 without tax. Tax on this guitar would be about $2,300. So just not even with the guitar, just the tax alone, you could buy a modern day used or new Fender American made Telecaster. And it would be really, really nice for $2,300. For $900, you could probably find one if you looked around on the used market. You could find a used American Telecaster, just a standard Tele, probably for $900. Guarantee you could buy one, of a lower quality, but even a good quality one, a American-made Fender Telecaster, you could get for $1,000, $1,200. So ask yourself, what are you getting for an extra? Let's say this guitar with tax is $28,000. A modern day Fender used guitar, $1,000. That's $27,000 difference. What are you getting for $27,000 that's so special? What are you getting? In other words, if this guitar was special and it did have a really good sound, is that really good sound $27,000 better than a modern day Telecaster really good sound? Same pickup configuration, same pickup switch, same volume knob, same tone pot as a modern day Tele. Nothing's changed. You're telling me this sounds $27,000 better? No. And I've played a bunch of vintage guitars. I've played a whole bunch of them. Okay. Tons of them. I've played them from late 50s, mid 60s, late 60s, early 70s, mid 70s, 80s. I've played a bunch. $27,000. Which brings me to number 4. And that is, a lot of times players, when you start playing a vintage guitar, it will break. These parts will give out on you. This pickup right here can and will go dead. This pickup down here will go dead. It'll get weak. It's a magnet with a wire wrapped around it. Every magnet loses its magnetism over time. Every one of them. The magnetic field weakens. You're playing a gig, you hit this switch, it could go out. It's been there since 1969. You don't have a blender in your kitchen from 1969. You don't have a vacuum because a vacuum is something special from 1969. They're all gone. They wore out. Everything we as men manufacture goes out. They decline in inefficiency as time goes on. And the same thing is with the guitar. If you look at guys that play vintage guitars, Eric Johnson plays an old like 54. He's had the pickups replaced. He's had the neck shaved down. He's had the tuning pegs replaced. He has the bridge replaced. He has all the tuners replaced. All the saddles replaced. So even when you buy a guitar like this to play it, the parts will wear out. Number 3 reason why you should not buy a vintage guitar. Eric Clapton and many other players did not play vintage guitars. Eric Clapton right now plays this guitar right off the shelf. If you went and bought this guitar, it's a custom shop one now, not the one that's a signature model on the floor. It's like $1,800. This one's more expensive than that. But his guitar tech said he takes them straight off the rack and plays them. They send them to him straight out of the shop, custom shop. He plays them. You think Eric Clapton right now could play a 1957 Strat? Of course he could. He had one for forever. You think he could play any Strat he wanted to? Of course he could. He plays a modern day brand new Strat. Jimi Hendrix. If Jimi Hendrix thought a 59 Stratocaster sounded so great, he could have had 100 of them. There were tons of 57, 59, 62, 63s around. Jimmy never played them. Jimmy never played anything other, or mostly, I'm going to say every now and then you see a picture of him with an SG or, a smaller headstock Strat, but just in general, the guy played 68, 69s right off the rack. You think Jimi Hendrix knows something about guitars? Right now in the modern day, this guy right here, his name's Guthrie. He's one of the best guitar players in the world. If you've never heard this guy, he's good, real good. And he plays a modern day guitar they build for him. I think it's like $2,400. Yeah, $2,800. This is his guitar. It's made to his specifications. He plays it. He doesn't play a vintage guitar. This guy is a guitar player's guitar player, and he doesn't play a vintage guitar. So you have Eric Clapton playing a modern day guitar. You have Jimi Hendrix playing modern day guitars. You have Guthrie playing modern day guitars. You have Andy Timmons playing modern day guitars. You have, I could go down the line of just tons of players that play guitars that are not vintage. Which brings me to my next point, which is number 4. And that is, when these guys who you think were playing vintage guitars, right? They weren't vintage when they were playing them. Jimmy Page is a perfect example. He's famous for playing a 1959 Les Paul, but he bought the guitar in 1969. It was only 10 years old. If you buy a 59 right now, 59, 69, 79, 89, 99, 2009, 2019, talking about a 60 plus year old guitar, 60 years old. Jimmy Page never played a 60-year-old guitar. All those recordings you hear from Led Zeppelin, they weren't made with the vintage guitar. They were made with a guitar. If he bought it in 68, right? You think about 1973, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73. He was playing a guitar that was about 14 years old. Wasn't even vintage. So all those recordings you hear of Jimmy Page, he was not playing a vintage guitar. The solo to Stairway to Heaven was done on a Telecaster Custom that I believe was made in 1968, 69. So look at that. That's not even 10 years old. The guitar he was playing this solo to Stairway to Heaven on wasn't even a 10-year-old guitar. Rory Gallagher. Rory Gallagher bought his 1961 Stratocaster in 1963. It was 2 years old. It wasn't a vintage guitar. When you heard his guitar in 1973, that guitar was only 12 years old. It wasn't even vintage. Stevie Ray Vaughan, he bought his 1963 Strat in 1975. It was 12 years old. It wasn't even vintage. He bought a used guitar. And then think about all the things Stevie had to do to that guitar. Had to have it refretted 3 times, had to have the tuning pegs replaced, had to have he put on a different bridge assembly. The pickups went dead in it. They were working on this guitar basically every night after he played it. They had to work on it to get it to stay at the standard. When it was vintage, which is what I was talking about earlier. So a lot of these guys that you think are playing vintage guitars, they weren't vintage when they're famous for playing them. And my number one reason why you should not buy a vintage guitar as a guitar player is the sound is in your hands. The sound is in your hands. 95% of your sound is technique. 95% of your sound is technique. Stevie Ray Vaughan could walk into a Guitar Center, if he was alive right now, and pull any Strat off the wall, plug it into any amp in the store, and make it sound like something. Why? Because the sound of Stevie Ray Vaughan is in his hands. It's not in his vintage guitar. He could make this sound out of any guitar. And he had multiple, this was his number one guitar, but he also had that one with Dan Electro pickups on it that Charlie Wirtz built. He had a Hamilton guitar that he loved and he played often, and it sounded just like Stevie. Then he had that maple neck Strat he played on, and he sounded like Stevie. Because the sound is in your hands. So those are the 5 reasons to not buy a vintage guitar. The price. The parts wear out and need to be replaced. Great modern day players and great players through time have not necessarily played on vintage guitars. They almost never do. The guitar and the guys who did, their guitars weren't vintage when they bought them. And then number 5, and the biggest reason, or number 1, the biggest reason is the sound is in your hands.